This program is powered by thevirtual.show, making your offline events virtual. Ladies and gentlemen, the host of WEBIT Virtual, Dr. Plamen Rusev.
Hello and welcome. Welcome to another program of WEBIT Virtual, a program where we are going to meet fascinating people with truly amazing stories, a program that will take us to another dimension of the impact of the COVID-19 and the war on the coronavirus that we have globally all around the world. It's such an honor to have all of you. I've just been informed by the studio that we have currently 158 countries, one just registered before I start. That's never happened in the history of WEBIT. Thank you all. Thank you to the whole world being with us. And thank you for the fact that the thought leadership that we wanted to bring back to the life is now happening. Thank you for joining us from everywhere. And I would like to say only one thing. Until now, we were trying to send the positive messages to the world. But many people were calling me and talking to me and saying, hey, don't forget, it's only the paranoids that survive. So I would like to say I'm a pronoic myself. I believe in the global conspiracy for the good of the humankind. And I don't mind positive news. I actually welcome them. And that's why we've built WEBIT Virtual, to create opportunities for positive news, to create the desirable future together in a collaborative manner. But it's about the real life. And it's about things that happen to us now. And it's about how we can all together fight and find a way to go to the next new normal, because it will be a new normal. And we all should know that. And there is one person that knows that very well. And I'm absolutely honored to have him with us on board. You know very well that our Global Impact Committee is bringing together people from all around the world with different walks of life, but one thing is in common. They are leaders. In times like this, I'm also seeing that there are stewards. And I'm questioning leadership over stewardship in times of crisis like today. So I think that with the stewardship of the WEBIT Impact Global Committee, with the participation of presidents, ministers, people of political and business power, but above all, values, people with hearts, we are on the right way to move ahead. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you the person who is representing our Global Impact Board and chairing one of the verticals. And today he's hosting that particular session, Dr. David Bray. Dr. Bray, thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for organizing the virtual WEBIT session. We have a fairly impressive group of positive change agents here to talk about how we can get through this crisis together.
Dr. Bray, before I give you the wheel of this wonderful journey that we are starting together, I would like to give a very brief information to our viewers. For those of them that do not know who you are, I would like to make up that lack of information for them and tell them your story. Before that, currently we have 8,100 viewers live with us. That's great. Thank you so much. So Dr. Bray has served in the variety of leadership roles in the turbulent environments, including bioterrorism preparedness and response from 2000 till 2005. Time on the ground in Afghanistan in 29, serving as a non-partisan executive director for the Bipartisan National Commission on R&D and providing leadership and non-partisan federal agency senior executive. He accepted the leadership role in December 2019 to incubate a new global center in the Atlantic Council. And we are absolutely honored to have him also as part of the WEBIT committee. Business Insider named him one of the top 24 Americans who are changing the world under 40, and he was named a young global leader of WEF for 2016-2021. Now, when you know who Dr. Bray is. Dr. Bray, thank you for joining. With your permission, if you allow me, I will introduce the rest of the panel who are truly phenomenal global leaders, and I will leave it up to you. Next, and someone that I have been following since I remember I was thinking about technology, is a person who is actually known as the father of the internet, Dr. Vint Cerf. Dr.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much, Plamen.
It's our honor to have you as part of this panel. And Vint is also part of Google for some time, already Vice President, Chief Internet Evangelist of Google. Thank you so much, Vint, for joining. And with your permission, we have discussed this before we start this program. And you allow me to mention the fact that until now, we have been meeting with all these fighters at the forefront of the war on coronavirus, medical doctors, scientists from all around the world, from Wuhan, China, through Lombardy, Milan, to London, everywhere in the world, India, Brazil, etc. But all of them, there is one thing in common with all of them. They are people who have not seen the virus anywhere but beyond their own eyes. They were fighting with their bodies, but their bodies were not fighting with the virus itself. You are the first participant in our program. And again, you allow me to mention that you have been infected with the COVID-19 and actually with the coronavirus and been through the COVID-19. And thanks God, you survived it. And we are saying this because, as we've discussed in the beginning, no one is immune.
That's exactly right. And just a little capsule summary. By good fortune, both my wife and I were tested positive in late March for COVID-19. And our symptoms were very mild. I had classic symptoms, things like fever, chills, a headache. I didn't lose my sense of taste or smell, which is interesting. But in spite of the fact that the symptoms were mild, I was extremely tired. My body was busy fighting the virus, and so I had very little energy to do anything else. And it took several weeks to recover. So that's the first point, is that it can take time to get back to normal. The second thing is it was very difficult for us to get tested. We live in Northern Virginia, and we were rejected several times when we requested tests, given that we could tell that we had the symptoms. Eventually, I ended up going into Washington, D.C. and paying to be tested and getting back a positive response. The thing which I think was the most psychologically difficult about this disease is that you heard stories about the various courses of the disease for people infected with this virus. Some of them had light symptoms and survived. Some of them had responded very badly and ended up in the ICUs, intensive care units, and some of them ended up being intubated, and some of them died. And so while you're in the middle of all of this, and you're hearing all of these various different paths of courses of the disease, you don't know which course you're on. And so psychologically, it's very scary until you come out the other end, if you come out the other end. And so we were very lucky. But even now, we don't know, for example, whether we have any immunity, or if we do have immunity, for how long it will last. So we're still exercising isolation protocol until that information is available. The last point, of course, is that we are far away from having a vaccine. And we don't even know, for example, how long the vaccine will provide immunity, whether it has to be an annual thing as we do with the ordinary flu. So there are plenty of unknowns at this point, and as all of you and the listeners know, this is a very difficult time for many people who don't have the resources to survive this for very much longer.
Absolutely, Vint. And I'm so proud of our society putting health before the economics, putting the well-being of the people before the economics of the market. So I hope it will continue like this, because that's why we say that we need more humanism than ever now, than anything you remember. And you mentioned something which was giving me some bumps, and you compared the current situation to the 1918. Hopefully it's not going to be, and hopefully we will prove that we are capable of dealing with this situation. But I can't agree more that the only sure thing, the only thing that we are 100% sure is that uncertainty, that we really don't know yet what is going to happen. But hey, we have some great people as part of this panel, and I'm looking forward to hear your vision, your thoughts, and how we move next. So Vint, again, pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us with this panel. I would like to invite and to introduce Susan Gordon, who is hello Susan, welcome, and thanks for having you with us. Susan is a former principal deputy director of the National Intelligence US. The Honorable Susan Gordon serves as a principal deputy director of National Intelligence in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. With nearly 3 decades of experience in IC, Ms. Gordon has served in a variety of leadership roles, spanning numerous intelligence organizations and disciplines. Most recently, Ms. Gordon served as a deputy director of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Susan, thank you so much for joining.
I'm delighted to be here. This is an important quest.
Absolutely, thank you so much, and we will hear more about how the coronavirus turned into and became a catalyst for so many geopolitical changes. Thank you so much, and I would like to introduce now Dr. Melissa Flagg. She's a senior fellow, Center of Security and Engineering Technology, US, and at Georgetown University. Previously, she served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Defense for Research, responsible for policy and oversight of Defense Department science and technology programs, including basic research for advanced technology development and the DoD laboratory experience, the Department of Defense Laboratory Enterprise. Thank you so much, Dr. Flagg, Melissa, for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful to be allowed to contribute to this conversation today.
I'm looking forward to hear. And last in the row, but actually someone who we expect to give a lot of contribution to this discussion is Terry Halvorsen. Is the currently Chief Information Officer, Executive Vice President, IT and Mobile Communications of Samsung Electronics. And Terry has started his Samsung Electronics career on April 1st, 2017 as Executive Vice President and Business of Government Group. He was since appointed as the Chief Information Officer. And prior to joining Samsung, he served as Department of Defense Chief Information Officer. He provided strategy leadership and guidance to create unified information management technology vision for the department and to ensure the delivery of information technology-based capabilities required to support the broad set of department missions. Thank you so much, Terry, for joining us. It's a real pleasure and honor.
Thank you, and what a pleasure and an honor to be part of the conversation and be part of the panel you have assembled here. And because I believe in humor, I would put out that I was appointed to the Samsung position on April Fool's Day, so maybe that sends a message.
Thank you so much. With this introduction, I would like to request our host, Dr. David Bray, to take the lead from here and to take us to a wonderful journey of tipping into your beautiful minds and hearing your vision of where we are heading next. Dr. Bray, please take the floor.
Thank you, Vlamen. Truly appreciate that wonderful setting of the stage, and I want to thank all our panelists. So we're going to jump right in. We're talking about the intersection of how technology and data, as well as geopolitics, is impacting both the response and the longer-term recovery from COVID-19. Vint, I'd like to go to you first and ask the question, how has COVID-19 impacted how the world collaborates, or in some cases doesn't collaborate, on technology and data issues associated with the response?
So thanks very much, David, for that question. Let me just try to summarize briefly. First of all, it's very evident from this conference, for example, that we're increasingly dependent during this period on online resources. So that means the network, the internet in general, and the World Wide Web have become even more important than they were before. It also highlights the fact that it is not available everywhere that many of us, including me, would like it to be. So we think only about half of the world's half of the world's population is able to access the internet. And that's more highlighted now than ever, especially as schools have closed and we're now expecting students to continue their education online. So we're discovering deficiencies and disparities and inequalities that need to be remedied. The other thing which has been quite dramatic from my point of view has been the increased use of computing power in order to help dig ourselves out of this situation. You hear the term computational X, for computational biology, computational chemistry, computational astronomy. So computation has become an extremely important part of the response to the COVID-19 disease and the virus that causes it. I've been reading some very interesting applications of machine learning to explore different molecular structures that could interfere with the virus's ability to dock with cells in the lungs, for example, and to inject their RNA, which allows viral reproduction. So computing power has turned out to be an extremely important component of the response. And finally, although I won't elaborate, the economic disparities that we see that make it very difficult for people to deal with the shelter in place, work from home. Not everyone's jobs will allow them to do that. And so we're seeing tremendous economic disparity and inequality and stress in our populations all around the world, and we have to find ways of dealing with that. So let me stop there. I'm sure others will have important things to say on this topic.
Well, thank you, Vint. And so what I heard was it's impacting both connectivity, but not everyone has connectivity, education, and digital inclusion. So now turning now to Sue, would be interested in your thoughts about what's the impact on geopolitics and maybe how are geopolitics shaping technology and data?
Thanks, David. And remind me to talk to you about setting me up to follow Vint. I need a better agent. So let me take it up. I think the COVID pandemic brings in very stark relief some changes that have been ongoing geopolitically for several years, but we didn't have to actually embrace them. Digital connectedness in the digital world has made each one of us able to do more. And we do things together, but we have done them in our own interests. Said differently, it's almost like we have been able to benefit from everything and be responsible for nothing. So COVID actually put a physical instantiation in just how bound we are together. And even though we took this physical world and we have moved it to do the things that Vint said about being able to connect digitally, the real question is, can we do our collective work digitally? Can we see collective situation? Can we make collective choice? Can we share collective risk? And so to me, what this moment has demonstrated is the intersection between physical and digital, brought home the shared situation. And what you are going to have to see technologically is things that allow us to share for collective action, to be able to trust what we're seeing is useful. And somehow we're going to have to figure out how we create culture, because culture is that act that allows us to operate when the rules don't all apply. So I think geopolitically, this is an incredibly important moment that could change everything, but only if we see it for what it is.
Well, I think you just dropped the mic on Vint there. So very inspiring, very impressive. Thank you, Sue, for that. I want to remind everybody that we're live. So if you do have questions for the panelists as we're having these conversations, please tweet both at WEBIT as well as at Good Tech Choices as the hashtag. We'd love to take your questions. I'm now going to pivot to Melissa.
David, if you allow me only a second, that was a great thing, because I forgot to mention it in the beginning. #WEBIT allows all the traffic into our live page, and where I will be just checking the questions afterwards, so I can represent the audience. Thank you so much for mentioning. #WEBIT will be the hashtag for the questions for this program. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And so now, Melissa, recognizing that now you have to follow on the heels of not just Vint, but also Sue, I look forward to how you're going to take the game up even higher. So Melissa, I want to ask you now the question that, we identified maybe how technology and data and geopolitics are changing things. What are the unmet issues or things that need to be addressed that if we don't address, may actually make the response suboptimal or pull us apart? What would be the things that you think that we should be thinking about that need to be resolved?
Thank you, David. Yes, I think there's a really interesting sort of conflict that's occurring in the sort of increased understanding that we're all connected globally, but also this requirement to become much more locked down and almost tribalized as borders close, as we are not close to a vaccine and not really aware of how viable a robust long-term vaccine will be. We don't really know whether this will be more like a vaccine that has to change every year or one that you get once. We don't know how long the immunity will last. So we don't know how long those borders are going to remain locked down. We also see nations rolling towards a deep recession, which tends to begin to conflate economic security and national security. So now you have a competitive state where people are desperate to make sure that their people can remain viably employed and feed themselves and have access to healthcare and other really critical things. But also we need to collaborate. We have this additional challenge of how do you walk this path between civil liberties and surveillance and sharing of that surveillance data across borders? And I think that we are at a moment where technology is going to take us down a path in each of these situations that will fundamentally alter the foundation of the new normal. And we need to be incredibly invested and forward-leaning in trying to push that path in a way that supports connectedness and that supports sharing and that does not support a tribalized autocratic set of states as we go forward.
Wow. Thank you, and agree wholeheartedly that there are values, whether they're intentional or unintentional, in the tech choices we make in response to the crisis. So we should be as intentional as possible to make sure those are the values we want, not just for the response, but ideally the long-term recovery. So Terry, I think each of the different panelists has just raised it up a notch each time. So you have now the august challenge of similar thoughts about what are the unmet challenges regarding technology and data, also associated with geopolitics, that we need to address to make sure the COVID-19 response is as optimal as it can be in the middle of this crisis.
But thank you. I think we've actually hit what most of those are. I mean, Vint talked about we have a huge segment of the world population that's not playing in these web programs. They're not connected. How do we make sure they get connected? That is the very first problem I think we need to attack. How do we get much more ubiquitous collaboration and connection to parts of the world, particularly, in the economic, the bottom parts of that are not playing here. And that gets to, I think, Melissa's comment about if we don't do that, I think we will tend to become more nationalistic and to use Melissa's term, more tribal, which won't help this. And then I guess from a technical standpoint, we've got a lot of data on COVID, but we don't have a lot of intelligence. And how are we going to sort through what is valid data and what is invalid data. I mean, in the U.S., obviously, we've had a huge issue with what I'll call fake news, but I think that's a worldwide internet issue. And how do we use technology to help us sort through that and be able to get at the real valuable pieces of data that will give us intelligence? The human is not going to be able to do that by themselves. We're going to need some augmented or artificial intelligence to go through that volume to help us distinguish what's real, what's valuable, and what is out there. In many cases, even sometimes, to be purposely misleading.
Excellent. So maybe if now we could just sort of start doing some lightning round discussion back and forth on this topic. And I see Vint's got his hand raised. I'm about to get to you because I actually was going to ask that Terry just set the stage about what could machines do to help make sense of the data. And maybe before we tackle that question, how do we bring together the data in a way that doesn't become surveillance state for those countries that don't want to have that be a way? Is there a way that we can have more trust? Is it data trust? Something that's more transparent in how this data is being brought together and what it's being used for? Vint, would you be willing to take that question, or were you thinking more about machine learning?
Well, I actually had a comment about the previous conversation, but let me respond to the question that you just asked. An example of an attempt to help the tracking, contact tracking, for example, is work that Google and Apple are collaborating on. And the essence of that is evanescent information. That is to say that the identifiers change regularly. Information is not kept for more than 14 days. And that's sort of an arbitrary number, but it's also the number that is frequently cited as the period of time, gestation time for the virus to manifest. So trying to figure out in a 2-week period during which contact might have happened is sort of a guideline. So there's work going on to try to make the surveillance as limited as possible while producing the maximum value, which is keeping track of who might have been exposed. So I think that the people who are doing that work ought to get some credit for that. I wanted to come back to the tribalism problem. When we run into these kinds of situations where the threat is literally worldwide, and we discover that there are shortfalls in the needed response. Look at what has happened with regard to masks and ventilators and other kinds of personal protective equipment. There's been a collective shortage, and it has led not to maximum production, but rather a competition for access to these important items and driving prices up, which makes them less and less affordable. So we have a serious problem when it comes to resources that are needed in order to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. And it doesn't stop with the physical equipment. What about a vaccine, which we don't have yet? Will there be enough? How quickly can it be distributed? What about food security? A whole series of things that challenge our ability to see ourselves as collectively cooperating and collectively in a situation that needs this kind of collaborative response, as opposed to I got mine and I don't care about anybody else. And we need to think hard about how to increase availability of resources of all sorts in order to avoid exactly the kind of conflict that would prolong the situation and maybe do permanent damage to our global ethic.
So I saw Melissa, it looked like you had a thought, then I'll go to Sue, and then I'll let Terry have the rejoinder. Go ahead, Melissa.
Yes, I agree really strongly with that, Vint, that there's this need to have availability, but I think there's a psychological aspect to this as well. Much of the conversation is around statistics, and I'm sitting in a rural area in the middle of the United States where the impact has been very different than it has on the coast. And there is a feeling that they have taken a larger economic hit relative to the health hit they would have taken in order to help others, but that they have not necessarily been recognized in a valid way for that mismatch, perhaps, and the conversation is not being, in my mind, particularly respectful of all points of view. And I think that is, again, increasing this feeling that people need to lock down and to sort of hoard and protect themselves with people who understand and respect them. versus trying to find a way to be collective with people we don't necessarily agree with and who aren't experiencing this process in the same way. And I think that when you expand this globally, you come to a whole nother set of challenges. And so I think technology can actually help. If we were pouring more money into manufacturing and scale up of these vaccines that we're going to need eventually, but that we don't need to wait to tackle those challenges once we actually get the vaccine. We need to be working that now. Maybe the thought about actually having access to scale up that would be modular around the world. And so people could see scale up and therefore availability potential in their areas. I feel like there are a lot of things we could be leaning forward on and being very proactive in the messaging of our technological choices, but it seems that they tend to lag the problem rather than leading the problem. And so I'm intrigued to see how we get there. I'm very hopeful, but I am experiencing the pandemic not from the bubble I live in Washington, D.C. as a general rule, and that has definitely shaped my view of this differently.
Excellent. And Sue, you've obviously interacted with world leaders at the highest level, and you've had to find ways to help move them along and focus things that they need to do. Melissa just talked about, how do we make sure technology is not lagging all the conversations that's happening here, but is part of the conversation? Do you have thoughts there?
Yes, I have thoughts. I'll choose two. One is, in the olden days, partnership was somebody saying this is what we're going to do and getting everyone to come with them, not only in the what, but the how. In this incredibly abundant, capable world, I think what partnership is going to be, we have shared outcome and shared value, but distributed implementation, right? And get away from, and find a way to be able to trust that a partner, whether that's a local within the United States or ally, is actually going to deliver the outcome, even though they may deliver it differently. Because I just think trying to get everyone together, whether from privacy, which is different in different geographies, or whether that is different localities. So that's one. And then the second thing is, we keep thinking that we are going to solve problems by simply amalgamating all the things that we have. Sometimes you have to create collectively. I'm a zoologist, so I always think, you don't get life by putting a bunch of amino acids and carbons and oxygen and nitrogen molecules in a petri dish and then just look at it and think that somehow life is going to issue forth. So I do think the second thing this is going to take is a purposeful description of what we need to be able to do now that we see this kind of thing, and then break it down into what we need to have, rather than saying we all have these things and somehow magically they are as a collective. And I think those are really interesting intersection between national intention and global intention and innovative solutions that could get us out of this.
Okay, and I'm going to go to Terry real quick for a rejoinder, but real quick, Sue, because I think fascinating that agreed that we can't expect that amalgamations are going to magically work, that we have to be intentional on it. Where do you see, or can you comment as to where do you see, is this going to be something that's going to be more government-led? Is this more industry-led? Or is this even sort of grassroots, local levels, like you said, distributed, coming together and then finding ways to have shared outcomes?
So I think the essence is shared responsibility. So government-led is generally identifying a problem that's big enough to warrant action. And then the second is private, recognizing that is worthy and they also have responsibility. And I think we're starting to see it in terms of trusted communications. So put aside geopolitics, and I would say that every free and open people wants to trust their communications and to be able to know that what they're seeing is true, not right or wrong, just true. So I think we're already seeing that as a foundation for that combination of big purpose and innovative solution.
Excellent. Thank you, Sue. Terry, we've heard comments about there's this differences between rural and urban areas, and Vint already talked about differences in connectivity, which you touched on as well. What are your thoughts about what are things we can do to address the response to be better?
I'm going to say this at the strategic level. One of the things we have to do is put ideology aside, not your values, but your ideologies about forms of government. And I think we have to be willing to take some chances and share data. Sometimes it may not be as secure as we want, but coming from a military background, there are many times when the mission, and that mission may have been to protect lives, we set security aside. I wish we didn't have to do that, but given the state of play today, that's something we're going to have to think about. And I just really think that what technology can do here is really work on how do we educate people to those facts. We see a lot about today the problems, and I think that's important. I think we've got to get the problems connected so that, as Melissa pointed out, the rural person separating this can see, hey, I share that problem, may not be the same way with the urban dweller. And frankly, I share that with the Chinese person who's doing their things, and the Korean and the US. We can do some of that connection through technology. And I think the other thing that's really important in all of these things, and maybe it sounds trite, we've got to get the information out on the things that went right. Hope is really powerful here.
Very well said, especially in an era of misinformation, disinformation. If you don't fill it with actual, factual, hopeful stories, don't be surprised if the battlefield is seated. Now, Terry, if you're open to this, since you work at Samsung and you were talking about technology and data, 2 days ago we did a discussion where we had Dame Wendy Hall about data trust in the UK, which is this idea that people can bring data together in a way that makes sure you remove any conflicts of interest to use the data for purposes other than public good. And this was partly in response to, I know Vint was mentioning some of the efforts that are being done for contact tracing. We're seeing, for example, in Singapore, even when it's voluntary, unfortunately, less than 1 in 6 of the people are choosing to do it. And so we still have this dearth of trust that we need to overcome. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about anything that maybe Samsung is able to do that can actually either help people know that their data is only being used for a specific purpose, or sort of embody what I would call sort of like share data to save lives. I'd be interested in your thoughts there.
Yeah, so I mean, I will say this, South Korea has done as a whole pretty well in managing this. And Samsung is a big part of that partnership. But in partnership, I mean, one of the things that they were able to do is that they do have an app in Korea that lets you see where the hotspots are, that the way it's constructed and the way it's secured, you cannot individually get to individual data. They have an app now that encourages and actually directs you to where you can get the closest testing. One of the things I think Vint was kind in his discussion about the testing problems in the US. The countries that have managed this well have made testing really available, use technology to do things very smartly. Samsung was part of the technology that helped. Korea just went through a huge election during the virus, using a lot of technology, maintaining social distancing. It was very, very well done. And I would say that the other thing that made that is, while Samsung was leading a lot of those efforts, it was the partnerships that the South Korean government really led. And when I meant led, they opened up, they took some great steps to say everybody's got to play here, and we're going to put aside some of the economic considerations and just get everybody to play. And I do think, to Sue Gordon's point, governments lead this. They don't necessarily get to the solutions, but they have to set the environment to get the solutions done. And I think that's the next big thing that has to happen.
Excellent, thank you. And I see, Vint, you raised your hand, so I'd be open for a joiner, and then I see Melissa after that. So go ahead, Vint.
Okay, so thank you very much, David. I'm just thinking about the COVID-19 situation as if it were a gigantic flashlight that is illuminating dark corners in the world. It's telling us about the things that we didn't prepare for, the resources that we don't have in order to respond to this kind of thing. And I think it's important for us to step back from the abyss that we're looking at right now in terms of the harms of COVID-19 and think a bit about how we should prepare ourselves not to have this problem in the future. And so it's not specific to pandemics. There are a lot of different bad things that could happen that will affect everyone on a global scale. And we should be thinking about what investments we should be making now in order to be better prepared to respond to some of these things. And although I'm sure I sound like a broken record, the obvious other huge confrontation we have is global warming. And so we might ask ourselves to begin cataloging all of the consequences of that trend and ask ourselves what investment we should be making in order to manage that problem better. And of course, we should be thinking about other kinds of problems that are of a scale like the pandemic that we should be thinking about. So that's one thing. The other thing I think I want to re-emphasize is that those of us who are in the technology space should be thinking hard about how to create abundance where there isn't any, because it's only in the presence of abundance that we are comfortable sharing. And if we think that there isn't going to be enough for everybody, the natural reaction is often, I'll get mine and I don't care about anybody else. And that happens at the family level, and it works its way up. It leads to tribal kinds of behavior. So thinking about abundance, I think, is a very important theme for us to keep in the back of our minds.
Very well said. And I saw that the other panelists enthusiastically agreed. Melissa, I'll go for you for your thoughts.
Thank you. I wanted to pull on something that Terry said that I think is really interesting. And it's this idea, and I think because I also worked at the Department of Defense, I'm very accustomed to this idea that security is relative to the mission. And I would really like to offer that we need to perhaps think about technical solutions to providing fora that let people proactively engage at this sort of public national level and international level to pull things back when we find ourselves on the other side of this.
Excellent. And I saw Sue has a comment. Then I'll get to you. I saw Sue had a question, and then we'll go to you. And then I think we'll invite Palin back to actually have some audience questions. So Sue, then Vint, and then we'll go to audience questions.
So Melissa, I think your point is perfect. In free and open societies, moments of crisis look chaotic. And the societies sometimes are so thirsty for order that totalitarian approaches can seep in. So one of the things that's so important about this conversation is let's be very clear about naming what we're trying to accomplish, and then use the open energy, the competitive energy, to be able to find solutions that are consistent with the values of a free, open people. I think that is really important.
Well said, Sue. Vint, you get the final rejoinder, and then we'll go to audience Q&A.
Yes. Well, first of all, I completely agree with what Sue just said. Order is essential. You cannot respond to these problems in disorder, in chaos. You simply cannot. What I was thinking about as a response to some of the problems that people have brought up is that transparency is our friend here. That being transparent about what you're doing, what you're planning to do, how you're going to do it, is vital to achieving trust. And so evident transparency is very, very important. And I think that we don't have enough of that right now. And until we adopt that posture, it will be very hard for people to relearn to trust their governmental agencies and to trust private sector, to trust other people whose incentives they can't see and therefore imagine the worst.
And real quick, before we go to audience Q&A, it's almost like Sue and Vint, you teed this up, and I know you didn't, but we do have this newly launched center called the Geotech Center at the Atlantic Council. Both Sue and Vint are commissioners. Terry and Melissa, we hope to find some way to get you involved as well. That is specifically looking at global, how we can do technology and data in a transparent way that gives people choices. So thank you for amplifying that. I think we have some audience questions. So do we?
David, back with you. What a fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity to our ecosystem to tap into your the thoughts and ideas of all these people who we have on the panel. Well, I will try to wrap up because I receive questions from different channels. I would say one of the major that obviously uncertainty is the key elements of all. So the problem is that lack of opportunity to plan, how to plan it, what to plan. So there are questions which concern what trends we should watch so we can start planning accordingly. What would be the trends that you would say would be giving us some point of view beyond the uncertain?
So if anyone wants to go first, you can jump in or wait. Okay, Vint's waving his hand.
It's Vint. So two things immediately occur to me. The first one is planning ahead for resources that may be needed to respond to these kinds of emergencies. And so in the case of the COVID-19, it's been clear that we don't have adequate personal protective equipment and gloves and masks and so on, ventilators. That's a specific instance. So the thing we need to do now is to exercise our imagination, think about the trends that we already see, or think about threats that are credible to our well-being, and ask the question: what should we be investing in infrastructure and in resources, stockpiles and things like that, in order to be better prepared to respond? So that's one thing that is very clear. We should take advantage of this experience in order to do that. The second thing is to recognize what is likely to have changed as we come out of this COVID-19 pandemic. And we touched on some of those things like online education and the like. We should be asking ourselves, what other things are likely to be different in the world we walk into at the end of this particular pandemic that we should be preparing for? Whether that means building better communications capability, driving costs out, training people to be safer in online environments. We can make up a pretty long list, but we should be using this particular crisis to prepare better for the next one that shows up than we have prepared for this one.
All right, thank you, Vint. I see that both Terry and Melissa also have thoughts, and I'll add, it's not just the global trends I think people are looking for, but what investments we should do too. So Terry, what are your thoughts?
At tactical operational level, one of the things this has shown us is that we have both national and international massive distribution problems. While we had a lot of shortages, we also have a lot of stockpiles that still nobody knows about. We haven't distributed that around the world carefully. So that's got to be one of the things we both use technology and society to fix. And I will keep coming back to the one thing: somebody's got to be first. I mean, it takes somebody to start being that said, I'm going to trust, I'm going to put it out there. I would hope, and I think that it will happen, that the nations that embrace that open society, and the U.S. being a key one there, will begin to take more of those steps. Say, we're putting it out, we're going to trust it.
Thank you, Terry. Melissa.
Thank you, David. I think I have two sort of separate things that I think we should be watching. One is, I think we need to be watching the employment areas that do not come back. We need to be watching employment trends to see which sectors fundamentally have been displaced. This is going to tell us a lot about areas where the economic security is not coming back, and where we may need to be thinking about actually getting employment or social safety nets in place, or we may have a certain amount of instability, and you want to be ahead of that curve. And we know this is going to happen, that now companies have invested in technologies that have allowed them to explore remote work, virtual work, displacement of physical locations, and not all of those jobs are going to come back. So these employment spikes we've seen globally are going to have a destabilizing effect unless we lead and we get ahead of that curve. So we need to watch which sectors that is going to have the largest effect on. I think that's one, because economic security will be national security in the wave of such a large global recession. Two, I think we need to watch the progress on these vaccines very carefully. We do not know which type of vaccine is going to be most viable. We don't know how long lasting it will be. And we don't know what these waves of infection are going to look like. We know we're going to have them. We don't know what they're going to look like. And so making sure that if by chance this newer approach to vaccine development that has never actually partner with different nations, because it's going to change how we are able to collaborate and communicate.
Excellent. And Sue, did you have anything you wanted to do on that one as a rejoinder? I saw you raised your hand. Oh, there.
Just real quick, since we are all deciding for each other now, that's one of the biggest change. I think modeling and simulation for practitioners, massive models to be able to understand the impact of decisions, whether the impact is supply chain and where you have the suppliers to how you handle things like border crossing. So I think we do scientific modeling. I'm not sure that our practitioners have access to the kind of massive models that they need.
Well said. Is there another question that we have from the audience?
Yeah, there are a bunch of one which is a tribute to someone we have on the panel. In December '97, President Bill Clinton presented the U.S. National Medal of Technology to Vint Cerf and his colleague Robert Kahn for what they've done, founding and developing the internet. How would the crisis now look like without internet?
Badly.
That's a really good question. And, I'm trying to imagine what it was like in 1918. We didn't have an internet. We barely had radio. We had the telephone, but not much else. And so we probably could learn some lessons by looking back at the response during that time period to that particular pandemic. I think, if anything, we are lucky that we have this technology in our hands, and we are exercising its use in a variety of different ways. And we will have learned a lot, I think, from looking back at the way in which it was used or the way in which it didn't work and needs to change. I can't imagine what it must have been like 100 years ago to try to cope with this, because the information sources were so much more limited. At the same time, though, I think there was less possibility for disinformation, which all of us are painfully aware of in this online environment. And so in some ways, less information was more when there was more reliable information available than there seems to be today.
And actually, I'm glad you went there, Vint, because I know Terry brought it up, and I'd be interested in our other panelists' views. What can we do to address not just the health side and the economy side, but there is a very large infodemic that was already present before COVID-19. I mean, we already were seeing polarization and misinformation in the years leading up to COVID-19.
Sue is so right about this. This is a piece of abundance we didn't need. And now what we need now is critical thinking. We have brains. God gave us brains. We should be using them. We need to give people tools to make use of those brains to cope with the wealth of information and misinformation and disinformation that's flying around. And we have to find tools that they can trust that will help them. This is not purely a technical solution. This is really getting people to work. It's hard work. Critical thinking is hard work. You need to be trained to do that. And people will be well served if we teach them how to do that and if they exercise that critical thinking.
So Terry and then Melissa, real quick, rejoiners, I saw you raise your hands too.
Well, one of the things that I do think we can do here is, and we've talked a little bit about education. One of the things that I think we have an open opportunity to do is really expand the way we educate a much wider part of the world population here. And to Vince's point about critical thinking, the way you can present critical thinking in this mobile world, I think is really good. I mean, you have the ability to do really interesting modeling simulations that you can now show to students. We should be, and this is again back to it, this is one area where we may have learned some really valuable, good things about what we can do in education. And now we need to collect those and kind of start putting that in place to teach critical thinking. And to Sue's point, the characteristics of truth are different. We ought to be able to take this and, hey, here's a way to start evaluating data that tells you, is it a high probability it's true or low? And here's what you should do with that data, and here's how critical thinking can be exposed. All of those are almost, perfectly set up and designed for this new kind of mobile environment.
Excellent. Thank you, Terry. Melissa?
Maybe I take a slightly different point of view on this. I mean, we're 3 times, just in the United States, we're 3 times the population we were in 1918. We have instantaneous global travel. We are a different society, and we are a different global society. And I think that it's very challenging for people to hear lots of people shouting at them to do more stuff. And we need to meet people where they are. And where they are is at church and at school and at the local city council meeting. And if you can't build trusted communicators in locations with people who don't think just like you, who don't live in your bubble, who don't think statistics are appropriate to apply to the people in their community that don't look like those statistics, you're going to lose the battle to beg people to critically think just like you critically think, and to weight those inputs to that model the same as you do. And to understand what a model is and what a bloody algorithm is, right? I mean, it's just math as far as I can tell, but I'm a chemist, so don't let me speak for anybody. I do think that this conversation has become, it feels aggressive at the local level when you're on the receiving end of it and you have no technical background and you go to work every day and try very hard to get your kids educated to do better than you. And I think we need to really think about the tone of this discussion if we want to bring people along with us. And if we don't bring them along with us, then that's not a very hopeful future. So I think we need to get out of our bubbles and realize communication suggests we're talking at people. We need a conversation where we shut up and listen occasionally too.
Right. So if I could build on what I just heard from all 4 of you, it's education plus empathy that leads to engagement informed by that empathy. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, David, for wrapping up. And thank you so much, Melissa, for this positive, wonderful message that you sent at the end of this conversation. I'm so grateful to all of you for joining it and being part of it. And I look forward to continue the discussion and adding more value to that particular fight we've never had before. And I believe that's the fight for humanity, a fight for a given hand, taken hand, and supporting each other of making the next step further. Thank you all for giving your hands here. Thank you for supporting us. What would have been it if we didn't have the father of internet and not having some internet problems? We did, but we coped with it and we found a solution. So we made sure that everyone can be with us and listen to this fantastic discussion. Thank you one more time to all of you who were with us. Thank you so much for being part of this panel, ladies and gentlemen. And here at the end of this discussion, I would like just to announce that tomorrow, same time, we shall be meeting the investment legend, Tim Draper, along with the founder of Early Bird, and with partner from SoftBank in discussions on what is the future of investment, what is the future of the venture capital, and how it will impact the innovation world and the startup ecosystems. Thank you all for being with us and wish you health. Thank you.